All right, today we're going to break down something absolutely wild. It's one of the biggest, most expensive, most insane YouTube projects ever attempted, a real-life recreation of the global phenomenon Squid Game. You know, when you were watching the show, you probably asked yourself the same question millions of others did. But what if it wasn't just a thought experiment? What if you, you, actually had a shot at that kind of life-changing cash? Well, that's where Mr. Beast comes in. You know him, right? He's the guy famous for making completely insane ideas a reality. And he didn't just sit around wondering. He went and built a gigantic, real-life competition to find out for sure. And get this, he brought together 456 total strangers. That number's not random, of course. It's the exact number from the show. All of them competing in these super high-stakes games for a truly huge prize. And here's Mr. Beast himself laying it all out. The premise was simple, almost brutal, really. The last person standing out of all 456 walks away with 456 grand. So how did this whole thing actually play out? Well, let's dive right into the first game. Okay, so the very first challenge was basically designed for chaos. It was a massive culling of the herd, a brutal test of reflexes and pure nerve that was meant to just immediately slash the number of competitors. The rules? Pretty much straight from the show. You move on green light, you freeze on red light. The big difference, obviously, is that instead of, a deadly outcome, each player wore this little device on their chest that would pop really loudly to show they were out. So simple, but man, it was so effective at cranking up the tension. And what's so fascinating is how fast people started strategizing. They even threw in a surprise yellow light as a trick, which caught a ton of people off guard. You had some players just hanging back, literally using other people as human shields to see what would happen. But once that clock started ticking down, all that strategy just went out the window. It became this completely frantic, desperate sprint to the finish. And boom, just like that, the field was almost cut in half. Can you believe it? In just that one game, 224 people were sent packing. That left only 232 survivors to move on. All right, so the next challenge was a total 180. It wasn't about speed anymore. This one was all about having steady hands and insane focus. Next up, we've got the infamous honeycomb challenge. So players had to pick a symbol, but they had no idea which shape it was for. If you got the circle, man, that was a huge sigh of relief. But pulling back that curtain and seeing the umbrella, yeah, that was pretty much a death sentence in this game. And here's a wild little detail for you. A few of the contestants actually smuggled in lighters to try and melt their way through the honeycomb. So despite all that crazy pressure and, yeah, some pretty clever cheating, 142 players somehow made it through. But wait, before they could even get to the next game, Mr. Beast threw in this awesome strategic curveball. He offered $4,000 cash to anyone who was willing to just walk away right then and there. What a clever way to test their greed versus their confidence, right? And you know what? A surprising number of people actually took the deal. It brought the group down to exactly 120 players. And that number was no accident. It was the perfect setup for the team-based games that were coming up next. So now the whole dynamic of the game shifts, dramatically. It's not about what you can do on your own anymore. Now it's all about getting on the right team if you want to survive. And you could see two totally different strategies pop up almost immediately. You had some teams just going for pure, raw strength. One team even had this controversial no girls allowed rule. Then you had other teams trying for a more balanced approach, what they called a mix of intelligence, skill, and brawn. I mean, these matches were so intense that one team literally pulled hard enough to break part of the set. And the results? They were just as brutal. The number of players got sliced in half again, leaving only 60 people standing. Okay, so this next game, this might have been the most psychologically cruel part of the entire thing. It was specifically designed to turn best friends into bitter rivals. See, the contestants didn't get to pick who they played against. The production team had actually been watching them, tracking who they were spending the most time with. So their roommates, their new best friends, the people they'd started to really rely on, those were now the very people they had to knock out of the game. Just brutal. So players had to figure out how to compete against their friends. Some went with a classic game of odd or even, others just made up rules on the spot. And there was this one moment, it was just heart-wrenching. Two friends just couldn't bring themselves to eliminate the other, so they left their entire fate up to a single coin flip. In this game, all those alliances and friendships meant absolutely nothing. When it was all said and done, another 30 people were gone, and the ones who survived were just emotionally wrecked. So we go from that emotional warfare to another complete pivot. This next challenge threw all that strategy out the window. It all boiled down to just two things: pure dumb luck and having some serious nerve. And you could really see the dynamic change as time went on. At first, it was all these cautious little steps. But after a couple of people fell, this standoff started. The players with the higher numbers, the ones in the back, just refused to move and take that 50-50 risk. But then the clock dips under 3 minutes, and that standoff just explodes into pure panic. It became a chaotic, desperate scramble to get across the last few panels. The second that timer hit 0, anyone who wasn't safely across the finish line was out, instantly. And just like that, 4 more players were gone. We were down to the final 6. So these final 6, they actually got treated to a nice steak dinner. It was like the calm before the storm. One last moment of peace before the final game that would decide everything. Now, if you've seen the show, you're probably thinking, okay, the last game has to be the Squid Game, right? You know, that complex physical one. Well, there was one last twist in store. The final game was musical chairs. Yeah, musical chairs. And Mrbeast's reasoning was actually super simple and hilarious. He basically said none of the contestants knew how to play the actual Korean game of Squid, so they just went with something everyone on Earth understands, which, let me tell you, turned out to be surprisingly tense. So after a few really tense rounds, one player even got eliminated for sitting down too early. It all came down to this: 2 contestants circling one single chair. The music stopped. Contestant 709 slammed down into the chair, and just like that became $456,000 richer. He was the winner of the world's very first real-life Squid Game. And you know, that really brings us to the bigger picture here. This whole thing cost over $3.5 million to make and ended up being one of the most watched videos, like, ever. So when a single creator on YouTube can pull off a production this massive, one that gets viewership that rivals actual TV networks, what does that mean for the future of entertainment? Has the whole game been changed for good? It's something to think about.